What's up, guys? Welcome back to Bible Fun with Adults. Today we're studying Zechariah chapter 2. Let's jump right in.
Okay. Zechariah chapter 2 is a pretty interesting book of the Bible. Now, it's not one I think a lot of people spend a lot of time on. But here's what's interesting. If you've ever enjoyed the book of Revelation, you'll really like the book of Zechariah. And here's why. It could be that whenever you read through this, that much of what you read in Revelation that John the Revelator is writing about, maybe he's got Zechariah in the back of his brain. Because, for instance, in the book of Revelation, there's a moment where God's angels kind of go out and they measure the city of Jerusalem, the New Jerusalem, in Revelation. Well, that's exactly what we read about today. So, matter of fact, remember yesterday in chapter 1, we talked about, or Zechariah had a vision of some horses, and they were different colors with different color riders. Well, isn't that what kind of the four horsemen in Revelation sounded like? So there's a lot of parallels in a lot of these visions. So if you like visions and prophecy, you might really like this book. Now, here's what I don't know, but I always thought was neat. So there are some people who think that when Zechariah is having these visions, and we don't know if he's asleep or if he just has them during the day, we don't know about that. But we do know that when Zechariah has these visions, many of them sound so oddly similar to what John saw in Revelation, in the Revelation, that a lot of people think, well, what if God let Zechariah watch the same time he was teaching John? And you go, oh, well, they lived at different periods. Yeah, but if God is eternal and exists without time, then he can reach in at whatever point he wants and bring these two guys up and let us see the same. You say, well, is that what happened? I don't know, but it's neat to think about. So here's what's happening in Zechariah chapter 2. In chapter 2, the Israelites are coming back. They're supposed to be rebuilding the temple, rebuilding the walls, rebuilding the city, and just rebuilding in general. But they're really worried. They're like, man, will it ever be as good as it used to be? And so in chapter 2, God is assuring his people that what he has planned for them is better than what they've ever had before. As a matter of fact, they're going to have a city, and in this city, this is something that they can shout for joy over. It's something they can celebrate. Why? Because God himself says, you're not just going to have a city, you're going to have me. And he says, and because of that, all of you who are still on the fence about whether or not you're coming back home from Babylon, this is the time to come back. All right? So, here's the chapter. So, Zechariah sees an angel going out and he pulls out a measuring tape. And another angel says, hey, what are you doing? He said, I'm going to measure the city. And the angel said, well, why are you measuring? He says, I want to see how big it is. And then Zechariah hears him say, well, listen, you don't even have to worry about that. He said, because there's going to be a day when Jerusalem is going to overflow out of that property, where there's not even going to be enough space for walls. We're just going to overflow this land. And that's a wonderful promise, and that's kind of where our takeaways come from today. Jill, what was your takeaway from this chapter?
So my takeaway was that he had a vision of angels measuring Jerusalem, and another angel said, what are you doing? And he said, I'm measuring to see how big it is. And he said, it doesn't matter how big it is, because we're going to have so many people that we can't even build walls, because the Lord will be our walls.
That's right, Jeff. Now, why do we think that it's going to be so many people? Because only a few people came back originally. This is where John's takeaway comes from.
So, my takeaway kind of piggybacks off of the thought that, or it is the thought that God's kingdom, or Jerusalem, is going to grow so big that it's going to overflow the land. And so, if you think that it's just talking about the city, I think that's not really what it's talking about. I think it's just Christians in general. Like, all the Christians in all the land are just they're gonna be so many one day, and yeah.
Yeah, and I think you're right about that, John. It says even in verse 11, he says, many nations shall be joined to the Lord in that day, and they shall become my people. So if they're becoming his people, were they his people before?
No.
Well, how do we become his people?
Jesus.
Through Jesus, that's right. So here's a connection. It's always been God's plan to do this. So when we go to the last book of the Bible, in Revelation 5, verse 9, it says this, and you have redeemed us. That means bought us and freed us. You have redeemed us to God by your blood. By whose blood, John?
Jesus.
By Jesus'. And listen, out of every tribe and tongue and people and nation. How many tribes and peoples and tongues and nations? Everyone. Now let's look at God's love. Jeb, what does it mean when it says here that he's going to keep them as the apple of his eye? What does that mean?
The apple of your eye is like your pupil, and that means he's going to have your eye on you forever.
That's right. And so what it's saying here is Jerusalem is not going to need walls. Why? It's not going to need walls. No, it's not going to need protection. Why? Because God himself will be their protection. And they are so precious to him that the center of God's eye will always be on his people. And when we hear this, we think back to what God has always said. He told Abraham, don't be afraid, don't be discouraged. He told Joshua, do not be afraid, don't be discouraged, don't be dismayed, or any of those. Why? For the Lord your God is what? With you. And so this is still continuing. So when you're reading through this, by the way, this is interesting because in verse number 12, this is the only time in the whole, this is the only place in the Bible where the land of Israel is called the Holy Land. It says, and the Lord will take possession of Judah as his inheritance in the Holy Land and will again choose Jerusalem. So the presence of the Lord is going to be the source of their joy and their celebration. And the Lord is calling together all of these Jews back from Babylon to come. He said, listen, leave the comforts of Babylon and come home. Why? Because what he says, you're not just coming back to a land, you're coming back home to me. And what I like about this is in those days, God was bringing his people back from Babylon. But at the end of days, the Lord is going to gather all kinds of people to himself, and we're going to be made his people. And we know that through who?
Jesus.
That's it. That's the chapter. We'll see you tomorrow in chapter number 3, which is vision number 4. All right? We'll see you then. Bye.
Bye.